and welcome back to Reunited States, the podcast where we bring rational discourse back to our national dialogue. From Manchester, New Hampshire, on this beautiful spring day, my name is Jesse Saywell.
And from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Erg.
And we are back, and hopefully Tyler does not sound like he's in a cathedral.
I do not.
But I'm glad to hear it here. Thank you all for joining us again. Obviously, there's a lot that we could go into, but I think the big story that we really need to touch on to get started, Tyler, first and foremost, is congratulating you on becoming a homeowner. Congratulations, officially a homeowner.
Thank you. Yes. Felt impossible, and now I own a home in LA. Isn't that crazy? It's possible, guys. Possible. It's insane, but it is.
No,
possible.
It's not.
Okay,
possible
fine. It's not
for
possible.
you.
I lied.
It is impossible.
You're making me sound like I'm the 1% or something. I'm far from that, believe me.
You are the 1%. You and Tom Steyer are buddies here, so...
Oh, yeah, our next governor. Lord.
You and the next governor, Tom Steyer, you are buddies. You are in the 1%.
Tom Steyer pisses my, annual, salary for breakfast.
Yeah, that sounds about right, yeah. But, jokes aside, congratulations, my friend. Very happy for you.
Thank you.
But in the world, there are some other stories. I know that that's the biggest story in the world right now is you becoming a homeowner. But there are some other stories that are significant, and perhaps nothing more significant than the recent news coming out of the Supreme Court that I suspect you share my outrage and deep frustration and just general sadness about. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're thrilled with this decision, Tyler. I don't know. But I want to hear your thoughts on the recent Supreme Court decision. You want to share with our audience, first and foremost, what the Supreme Court decided and then how you feel about it.
Absolutely. Everyone knows my favorite thing is to analyze SCOTUS decisions. But let's get into it. So recently, the Supreme Court heard arguments regarding a case that went to the Supreme Court coming from the redistricting attempts out of Louisiana. Now, we've heard a lot about redistricting across the country, right? And in Texas and California, all over, right? There have been attempts to gain red seats. There have been counter attempts to gain blue seats. And it's just kind of going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Now, this particular case in Louisiana is interesting because, to me, this is not part of the chess game that we've been hearing about in the news of seats for political gain purposes, right? And counter moves and rebuttals and all these things. This is not actually part of that whole game. Louisiana has 6 districts, okay? Previously, they have 6 districts, 5 that are held by Republican seats, 1 that is held by a Democratic seat. Also, only 1 district that is predominantly African American in terms of the population that live in that district. And 3 guesses who their representative is. Yes, it's the Democrat. The other 5 districts in Louisiana are predominantly white, and they are all represented by Republicans, including our favorite person, Mike Johnson. The most Louisiana person you can ever see or even think of, right? So the Circuit Court in Louisiana, this is a handful of years ago now, 2022 or 3. The Circuit Court in Louisiana determined that having one predominantly African American district violates the Voting Rights Act because it is it's segregation in the worst case, right? Especially considering the population of Louisiana is 33% African American, right, across the board. And so the district courts said, hey, you have to redraw the 6th district or a district to better represent the population of Louisiana. So they redrew the 6th district, which I believe is Baton Rouge, I believe. And this was a previously held red seat that upon redrawing it to be to capture another predominantly African American segment of the population of Louisiana is now held by a Democrat. So we are officially 4-2 in Louisiana, 4 red seats and 2 blue seats. The 2 blue seats also both the only African American dominant districts in the state. And so this, and then coming from this, there was then a lawsuit that claims that this is racist, that this actually violates the Civil Rights Act, because you are now segregating voters based off race, that you are racially gerrymandering to give African American population more power and more representation. And this is wrong. Wrong to the white people. Oh, boo-hoo, white people. And so it went to Supreme Court. Obviously, it had to wait quite a while, but Supreme Court finally heard arguments, and they had announced their recent decision this past week, in which they, on party lines, so you know exactly who to blame, Roberts, Kavanaugh, Barrett, Gorsuch, Thomas, they wrote that, yes, in fact, according to their opinion, at least, I do highlight the word opinion here, that the redistricting was a violation apparently of the Civil Rights Act, and that this is that they shouldn't have redrawn that 6th district to represent the African American population of Louisiana. And let me explain to you a bit about what this means in statistical terms, because this bothers me to a crazy degree, and I'll tell you why. Previously, we had one district that was predominantly African American, right? The one that they actually had an ability to vote for their own representative, because they had no vote in any of the other districts, considering every other representative of the other 5 districts that are held by red seats are all white people, white man or a white woman. And then the one Democrat was a black dude. Now we have 2 black dudes. But think of it this way: 6 districts in Louisiana. One of them is predominantly African American. That is 16.6%. And now remember, what's the population ratio of African Americans in Louisiana? 33%. Double what these districts indicate, right? And so the circuit court says, make it 2, right? We need at least 2 to make it fair, to make it equitable, right? Because what's 2 out of 6? 2 out of 6 is 33%. Having 2 districts would literally give an actual proportional representation to the African American population in Louisiana. Now, do I think there's still issues with that? Absolutely. But you kind of see where we're going with statistically, right? And even then, it gets weirder when you look at registered voters, right? Registered voters, there's 2.9 million registered voters in Louisiana. And the difference in Democrats and Republicans are almost 50-50 of the people, of registered voters, not including independents and members of other political parties. 1.07 million Democrats, 1.055 million Republicans. Of the Democrats, 685,000 African American, 334 are white. Of the Republicans, of the 1,050,000 Republicans, only 23,000 are African American. So you kind of see where the leanings kind of go there. And so the Supreme Court decided, Yeah, no, that's not going to fly. Giving a proportional, redrawing districts so they're proportional to the population is a big no-no, which is insane to me. And I want to like cap this with a quote from Justice Thomas. Justice Thomas wrote this when he was concurring with the majority opinion of the thing. And I quote, "This court should never have interpreted Article 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to effectively give racial groups an entitlement to roughly proportional representation." End quote. That is verbatim the second sentence out of Justice Thomas's mouth when he wrote his concurring statement. That racial groups should not have an entitlement to roughly proportional representation. That is absolutely insane to me. That is absolutely insane to me. To say that we don't do, like, representation is the name of our political system, right? Is that we vote for representatives because we believe that these people best represent the populations that they are speaking for, right? Whether it's a district or a state or a city, like, the expectation is that they represent the community. And we have a Supreme Court saying, like, no, sorry, you don't deserve that if you're a member of a specific racial group. That's not the way that should go. And what this is going to have insane repercussions to redistricting efforts nationwide. I mean, especially on the grounds of trying to combat, systemic racism in the form of gerrymandering that has already been happening for God knows how many years at this point. We have, we have numerous districts across the country and states all over that have been subject to racially motivated, gerrymandering and redistricting attempts. And now with this decision, what we are effectively saying with this decision is that any attempt to fix that, any attempt to fix the errors of systemic racism in the form of districting in the past will be met with a reference to this specific opinion, where Judge Thomas said that racial groups should not be entitled to roughly proportional representation. That's what we got from the Supreme Court this week. Love it, right? Good Lord. What are your thoughts, Jesse? Because I'll tell you mine. I'm pissed. I think this is abhorrent and an absolute mockery of the values that we as a country claim to hold, right? Fair and equal representation, for all people, regardless of race, gender, ideology, et cetera, like, we're going backwards. This is just another example of going backwards and backwards to, at this point, the fucking Stone Ages. And I don't know what to do about it. I don't know what any of us can do about it. And that's the scary thing about a SCOTUS decision, is that there's not much you can do about it. When they make these rulings, it is effectively final. And it becomes a legal precedent for decisions that can be made forevermore, basically, right? Or until a new Supreme Court is assumed, which God knows when that could be, right? Because all the selections are made for life. But that's what we're looking at now. We're looking at our 6-3 Supreme Court, led by Thomas, who is so insanely conservative, it's frightening, effectively putting any notion of equity in forms of representation for political purposes, for voting, in the trash can. what do we do about that? You know, what are your thoughts, Jesse?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Supreme Court is the most devastating legacy, more than anything else, of the Trump administration. Um, it is. I mean, there's a good chance that by the end of his administration, or the end of his second term here, he will have appointed 5 of the 9 justices himself. That is deeply disturbing, and certainly wasn't supposed to be, like, no one was supposed to be able to do that, right? Like, no one was supposed to be able to essentially rework the entire federal branch in their image and vision, right? That wasn't the that was not the intention there. With that being said, this ruling, I think, is going to go down in history with some of the more shameful rulings that we have seen throughout the history of the Supreme Court. A reminder that, the Dred Scott decision, which I think that inevitably is going to get brought up here, Dred Scott v. Sanford, was a really horrible decision that was, part of the reason why we had the Civil War, was the Dred Scott decision, which basically denied that people of black African descent were citizens, right? That American citizenship, regardless of free state versus slave state, did not apply to black African citizens. Plessy v. Ferguson in the late 1890s essentially established the Jim Crow era of the South, which was, separate but equal, right? It was this belief that, facilities, that as long as facilities were offered for each race, right, that there could be distinction based on the color of your skin within the government, within social offerings, and of course they would say separate but equal, but the offerings were never equal, right? They were never equal.
Of course. What's going to happen to Brown v. Board of Education,
Yeah, I mean, what's already happening to education in this country, where we have largely been, that has been the groundswell of segregation in this country, what I call resegregation. People talk about gentrification. There are a lot of experts that think that term is badly used. It is resegregation in many ways. It is moving people of color to specific places where they go to school in specific places, and moving white people into other places. And again, there was this separate...
I find it interesting because I think a lot of people use gentrification to say, like, oh no, we're just making this nice, and if you can't afford it, you go somewhere else, and because we're not telling you where to go, it's okay.
Yeah.
We're just saying no longer here because it's too wealthy for you. And believe me, living in LA, I see it. Yeah, I see it happening literally by the day. Like, it's actually kind of insane. I mean, the neighborhood that I'm moving into 5 years ago was not great. 10, 15 years ago was very not great. Now, I can walk my... I mean, it's why I was okay moving there. I can walk my 2.5-year-old around it, and it's completely safe. And I'm not saying that's like, oh, like, woohoo, gentrification. Like, because a lot of the reason, like, these things are being forced is because they're obviously, like, shoveling, like, I say shoveling because it is literally what they're doing, taking, like, transient and, like, homeless, unhoused folks and, like, throwing them God knows where, right? And they're jacking up the house rates so people who historically lived there can no longer afford to live there. But where are they going? Who knows? And it's sad because it's like, it's difficult to have opinions when you live in it, because you kind of are, like, stuck between this idea of, like, I'm blessed I can live there and I can see it kind of like, improving as a neighborhood, but also like there's this weird like sour taste in your mouth as a person who cares about human life, and like the right for all people to live wherever they want, and like seeing that this effectively relocates folks that just want to live where they've always lived. It's sad, like it's really sad. It's such a weird catch.
Yeah, and look, gentrification as a concept is complicated. There is no way to sit here and say that inherently it is all bad, right? Right? Like there are aspects of gentrification in having like safer schools and streets and all of this in various places, that it would be difficult to say, oh, well, we should have stayed exactly the same, right? But, I moved to Los Angeles and I lived in Little Armenia. There are no Armenians in Little Armenia, right? Like that's...
I grew up
there's
there,
none.
yeah.
There's very few that still live there. Almost all of them have moved to Glendale, and now a lot of them are getting priced out of Glendale, right? Like, so... gentrification very, very obvious in large portions of that city and many others, right? Look at San Francisco. Look at Oakland. These are places that have in many ways lost their culture. Lost the traditional culture that existed.
Yeah, when they lost the Raiders, right?
But no, like that's obviously funny, but like Oakland lost the chip on its shoulder. It's lost like the general connection to African American culture in Oakland. It was a huge influential piece for West Coast African American culture, and it has lost a lot of that in recent years. And so I can't help but I look at D.C., Washington D.C. I mean, nowhere has gentrification been as visible to me as it has been in D.C. over the last 20 years. It's striking, and it's almost disturbing how white D.C. is now, and how much that has changed the vibes of the city, like the feel of the city. Yes, there are places, contrary to what Trump would say about D.C. being like this unsafe hellhole. That's largely unfair and untrue, first and foremost. But D.C. is wildly gentrified to, an enormous extent. Going back, though, to, like, the Supreme Court decision, right? And this is all kind of related, I promise. But, like, Dred Scott, Plessy v. Ferguson, and now this Supreme Court decision that basically says, okay, the Civil Rights Act was necessary in the past, but it's not necessary anymore, right? Or the Voting Rights Act, in particular, the Voting Rights Act.
Did I say civil rights earlier?
I think we just have a disagreement, a fundamental disagreement on where we are in the country, right? I would be the first to tell you that things are infinitely better for African Americans and for civil rights in this country, even under the Trump administration, even under the kind of backward trend that we're seeing in many rights being, taken away. Things are infinitely better now than they were in the 1960s. But the election of a black president was not like the culmination, everything is good now. Like, I think that a lot of people really still are under this mentality that, like, racism within the system doesn't exist. Systemic racism within our electoral system does exist. And we have only recently, in the last 2 decades, really finally achieved fairness in our electoral system to where minority voters have a significant impact on elections. And that's why this is happening. This is a backlash to that. It is a backlash to our electorate becoming a multi-ethnic, multiracial democracy. And there are people who just don't want that to be the case. And so we are going to have to fight for this again. And I think you ask, like, what's the path out of this? Well, the Supreme Court's not going to be the path out of this. As you said, like, Supreme Court,
That's for sure.
Dred Scott happened in 1857. It took a civil war and a constitutional amendment due to one half of the country, like, abandoning the country to be able to end, to reverse the catastrophe that was Dred Scott. Plessy v. Ferguson was decided in 1896. It took 60 years, over 60 years, to reverse course on Plessy. So these sorts of decisions have major, major ramifications. I don't see the Supreme Court being the one to overturn this. I think the only option is Congress has to find a way to end gerrymandering in general, right? To take out the power, to take the power away from Congress to choose their own voters. And I do think that the American people are generally in favor of this. And I keep saying this. I think that there is a movement that is waiting to happen. It's waiting for the right candidate. It's waiting for a candidate that it can appeal to enough people on both sides of the political spectrum that runs on three things. One, getting money out of politics. Two, ending gerrymandering. And three, term limits. Those three things are universally popular if you ask the average American about this. And those three things need to be part of a major party platform in which the parties all agree on, where the party itself gets behind that movement. And I think you could see the American people supporting that sort of political movement. The problem is it almost, by definition, has to be an outsider coming in to do that. Because it would have to be somebody who can essentially tell the politicians, no, you don't get to keep running forever. You get to keep, cashing in on all of this. You don't get to trade stocks. You don't get to, reach out to these super PACs where people can donate whatever they want, and billionaires can essentially decide who the candidates are. No, you don't get to choose your voters. We're going to have competitive elections. It has to be an outside candidate, and it really has to be an outside candidate running for president, because the presidency would need to be the pulpit for which the president calls out Congress and essentially says, this is what we need to do. And when we talk about a revolution in this country, that Bernie Sanders and all these people have talked about, which is not, like, what they're talking about is this, like, socialist revolution. I don't think that is actually achievable, because I think that sort of wealth disparity and that, like, rearranging of the social order is scary to people, and I think the people that are behind that are largely scary. The revolution that needs to take place in this country, the political revolution, relates to those three things that I just mentioned. It relates to how we choose our representatives and how long they can stay there. And I think that's a platform that we just have to find the right candidate to run. But the party is not going to do it. The party's not going to put up that person. They're not going to, either party. Neither one is going to do that. And so it kind of has to be, I'm not even going to say it's a third-party candidate. It just has to be an outsider who does something similar to what Trump has done. Trump remade the Republican Party in his image and entirely changed their political belief system. The Republican Party supports things now that 10 years ago would be insane, right? Like, to think that the Republican Party would support some of the things that he actively has lobbied, including tariffs and trade and all sorts of things, right? Like this is not the same party. And we really need that either from the Republican Party or more ideally from the Democratic Party. We need somebody to come in and shake things up. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Tyler?
I mean, I agree with you on all those points. If there's any difference, it's that I do think that it right now it cannot be a third party. I don't think it can be someone that is outside of the two dominant political parties in our country. It has to be somebody who's going to represent a Democratic Party. Like I don't think there's any way around that. The reason, like the way Trump has been able to do the things he does is because he represents the Republican Party. If he came as an independent, if he came as a libertarian, if he came as any other party other than one of the big two, he would never have made a dent and he would never have been president. In fact, he tried as an independent, right? In like 2000 or whatever.
He talked about it. He didn't actually run, but he talked about it.
Yeah. But like it wouldn't have worked if he were anything else. And it's going to be the same thing here. If we want somebody who's going to bring lasting change, the change that you're talking about, the change that we need, they need to adopt one of the two main political parties and then use that to reform it. And that's the only way. And I think this is kind of like the hard pill to swallow for a lot of people, because what I hear a lot is like, they hate the two-party system. Oh my God, it sucks. Like, I don't want to vote for any of them. I don't want to vote for anyone that has a D or an R next to their name. That's terrible. I'm going to vote for somebody who does not have those things, right? Hear it all the time. All the time, people like on both sides of the party. People are like, I don't want to vote for anyone that's a member of those two-party system of those two parties because I don't support the two-party system. I want to break it down and blah, 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 blah. And that's fine. And I get it. I'm also frustrated by it. I also wish it didn't exist. But guess what? It does. The reality of it is that it does exist. That we do live in a two-party system. Whether we want to or not, that's the world that we live in. And
yeah,
if it's the world we live in, pretending that we don't and pretending that we can just do something and snap our fingers and all of a sudden we're not in a two-party system, that's living in a fantasy land. And we can't afford to live in a fantasy land. We're just going to lose because the other side doesn't exist in a fantasy. The other side lives in the real world. So we have to act and strategize in accordance to the world that we live in and the rules of that world and the reality of the political system in America. And that reality is there's two parties and no one's going to be president if they're not a member of one of those two parties. That's the truth. That is just a fundamental truth. Whether you don't like that or not is besides the point. It is a fact. It is a fact that is going to be the truth. That's going to be what will happen for the foreseeable future, no matter what. And so, given that fact, what can we do while being bound to those rules? What can we do? Well, what we can do is work within that, right? We work within that and we dismantle it from the inside. But the only way to do that is going to be to adopt somebody who is from the outside, who is willing to bring the change, but also, is willing to embrace one or both of those parties, one of those parties at least, as their own, so that they could have the support of the establishment. And then once they're in, work on doing effectively what Trump did. Like, we saw it happen,
yeah.
Right? Like, literally, we saw it happen. Like, that's how they did it, and that's basically how we're going to have to do it, right? On the left, right? For Democrats to succeed in any way, shape, or form, for liberals, for leftists to be able to succeed in any sort of way, for progressives to win in any sort of way, that's what you're going to have to do. You're not going to be making
I
your
agree.
own party. You're not going to be creating the Progressive Party and fighting Democrats. No. No. You're going to be adopting the Democratic Party, and you're going to be changing it from the inside. But you have to adopt it in order to change it. You can't change it from the outside. You can't break in.
I agree.
You have to infiltrate and then do your thing once you're in.
Wholeheartedly agree on this. And I think that it's, I certainly, to clarify, I was not in any way advocating a third party kind of takeover.
Oh, I don't think so either. But I heard that, and I was like, I have a thing about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see that as being viable either. I do think that it needs to be somebody who does not have a long background of being part of the establishment, in the same way that Trump did, right? Like, Trump took over the Republican Party and basically became so popular as an outsider that they had to bend to what he wanted. I don't know. Do you see anyone in the Democratic Party or in the realm of Democratic politics who could do that?
I don't know. I don't know.
I only have one.
It's not your favorite basketball commentator?
No, it's not Stephen A. Smith. And for the record, let's set aside the fact that I still think he's going to end up running for president, even though he says he's not. But no, I think it's Wes Moore of Maryland. And people are going to say, well, that's an establishment person. No, he's not. He's never served in Congress. He was not the party choice for governor when he first ran for governor. He was not. He was an upstart outside candidate that they did not want to run. Nobody recruited him to run, all of that. He kind of ran as an outsider candidate and won, on the fact that he's a remarkably gifted orator. He's a remarkably gifted communicator. We've talked a lot about, the benefits of him as a candidate. I think you could see him running as kind of an outsider with inside track, right? Like, and he's got backers who are interested in people like George Clooney really want him to run for president. They think that he's, kind of the A candidate, right? He is the best candidate.
Well, if he's got George Clooney's nomination, then damn.
Well, look, I mean, George Clooney took down Biden, so let's throw that out there. But I'm also just going to say, like, a black candidate can get away with things in the Democratic Party right now that a white candidate cannot get away with. And I'm not saying that as a, like, there's some sort of inherent bias. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying that he can afford to be more moderate and get a level of credence and, like, pause before certain people start really going after him for having more moderate positions. So he can have more moderate positions on issues that make him more agreeable to maybe your mainstream voter, which is where most of the country is. We have the largest percentage of independents ever recorded in American history right now. But also, he can come in with this kind of populist, we need to fix the system mentality about gerrymandering, about term limits, about all sorts of things. He can come in with that, and if he has a certain level of popularity, it's going to be very difficult for the party to buck him on those issues, right? So, I don't want to say that Wes Moore is like the savior we need, but there is a part of me that genuinely, I was listening to him the other day, and the more I listen to the guy, the more I like him. And the more I go, damn, he's good at this. So there's a lot of time between now and 2028, but, he made a great point recently. He was like, the Kalshi markets, which, by the way, the fact that we can bet on who's going to win elections in this country now is insane.
Kalshi is a plague. Don't even get me started on that.
Yeah, if you're not familiar, Kalshi is basically putting markets, but there is no law that restricts someone like Wes Moore. He said this himself. He's like, why would I not take $1 million of my own money and bet I could go in there and I could bet the 3% chance that I'm not going to win re-election. And then I could drop out of the race and make that profit. There is no law, there is nothing that makes that illegal for him to do that. He's like, obviously I'm not going to do that, but there is nothing that actually would stop him from doing that. Or somebody in his family from doing that.
Is that right though? Because we do have regulations against sports bettings that would prevent things like that from happening.
If he knew that he could just justify it, he could come out later on in the year and say, "Oh, nope, I'm not gonna run for whatever reason." Like, as long as he can distinguish that those two things were not like planned ahead of time, and that's a very gray area. There's very little that could.
Yeah, I don't know.
There's very little.
Like, I get that there's no law on it, but I don't see him winning a court case where they're trying to claim that he, dropped out to make money. Like, I think that's a very easy case to win. But
the argument is not that he's going to do it or that he would advocate doing it. The argument is that legally, the way the system is set up right now is really fucked up and beneficial to these candidates who have insider information about a whole variety of things, right? And the way that money is involved in politics is all kinds of messed up. And the fact that he's willing to talk about that and just say, yeah, this is where it is. Look, it is interesting. Graham Plattner is running for Senate in Maine, and that's another bit of news that happened. Janet Mills, the governor of Maine, has dropped out of the race, so it really is Graham Plattner versus Susan Collins. And Graham Plattner is an oyster farmer. He's a very straightforward method of speaking, right? Jon Stewart recently had him on his podcast and said, "You're the first politician that's ever come on here that didn't have any canned response." He also said, "I can't wait to see how long it takes for Washington to fuck that up." And I hope he's wrong about that. But in general, there's issues, and I'm concerned about Plattner for a variety of reasons, just because he's an unknown. But he has been outpolling Janet Mills consistently, right, in terms of who could beat Susan Collins. And I find that interesting. Again, he's an outsider candidate. He's an outsider, no-nonsense, like, blue-collar oyster farmer who also apparently had some, like, Nazi tattoos and shit at some point in time, right? But he's running on a socialist platform in a state that is not really socialist, but is super populist and pissed off. And it looks like he has a really strong chance of winning. That's interesting to me. That is a very interesting, not that I think he's a future presidential candidate or any of that, I have no idea, but I will admit I have been surprised at how well he has been able to maintain and grow support in a state like Maine, that while being a blue state at the national level, is a very purpley state in general. I say this, being next door neighbors here in New Hampshire. I know Maine very well. So there's some interesting movement in that anti-establishment wing of the Democratic Party right now that I think is not just the Mamdanis. Because you definitely have the anti-establishment, like, socialist wing of the party that is, like, kind of like Mamdani is, no matter what you want to say about him, Mamdani is not a blue-collar person, right? He can say that all he wants. He's not. It's not who he is. But there is a general sense of people that are kind of, like, interested in the system, but they are also interested in uprooting the system in a way that might actually be viable, in a way that's not just like, let's try all socialist policies, let's go as far left on every issue as we can, let's, there is this blend of the economic populism, but kind of normalcy in our social issues, which has been the kryptonite of the Democratic Party, has been being too culturally abnormal on so many of these social issues in recent years. So, I don't know. I am really cautiously optimistic that a guy like Wes Moore is the balance, right? That he brings a little bit of everything to the table, can build a coalition And then maybe uproot some of this stuff, whether it's the money in politics, whether it's the gerrymandering. By the end of this decade, we're all going to be so sick of gerrymandering on both sides of the aisle because we're just doing it to fuck with each other now. You know, Trump started this shit, and now we're just going back and forth. And there's going to be no black representatives or black, majority district. There's going to be no Democrats in the entire South, right? Like, they're going to make this so the entire Southeast has no Democrats, even though it has the largest population of black people in America. If that's not evidence that the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act are still necessary in today's day and age, I don't know what is. The evidence is what they're planning to do. That's my rant.
Yeah, no, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's just because a law exists does not mean that it is the ultimate protection against what it says it is, right, in writing. And I think the analogy I like to make with that is in my line of work, right? It's in like employment law and human resources. When unions started like hitting their stride, and they started popping up everywhere. Why? For workers' rights, right? So like to ensure that we have safe working conditions, to ensure that we have equitable pay and all these things, right? And normal working hours, all that stuff. And as a result of pressure from these groups, these unions, now we have laws that effectively make these things, a national requirement, right? The 40-hour work week, OSHA, minimum wage, all these things, right? All these things are because we had unions that fought for the rights of workers. But just because we have these things in place now, just because we have these laws that are in effect across the nation, does that mean that unions are no longer necessary? Because the laws exist? I used to hear when I was in grad school from a lot of like super hardcore like HR people that, union busting people. They used to be like, oh yeah, it's like the unions are basically obsolete because everything they fought for that was good was already a law. So who cares? And I'm like, I mean, there's still plenty that they can fight for that is not codified in law and is still very much necessary for the protections of workers. But even the things that are codified in law, like just because it's in law does not mean it gets respected, right? It does not mean that it gets that it's being upheld by every single company in the nation. And unions have to continue to exist to protect the individual worker from ensuring that there are no infringements on the bases of these laws that already exist or other laws that may not exist yet. And so there is always going to be a need for an entity that protects a group, even if there is a law that already, quote unquote, on paper protects that group. Because that law is nothing but words if there is no one to enforce it. It's the same thing here. Voting Rights Act, all these things, like these are just words. If there's no one to enforce it, they mean nothing. So yes, I mean, we absolutely still need groups and we still need decisions and courts, judges that are going to continuously defend the rights of Americans, even if there are laws that already do that, because laws can be broken. And if a law is broken and no one says anything about it, then nothing happens, right? And so it's just how it is with unions in 2026, right? In the employment sector, it's the same thing with this, right? It's the same thing. This is why the Supreme Court decision is so wrong, because it claims that because a law existed that was written in the 60s, that there is no longer any need to focus on the protections of those people because the law protects them. But the law doesn't protect them. It doesn't. We're seeing it, right? We're seeing it actively. The law does not protect them because there are enough people who endorse breaking that law and breaking other laws for the benefit of other parties, right? Other demographics. And if we don't continue to defend the rights of those who are marginalized, then their voice gets smaller and smaller, and they will continue to be to be segregated, to be marginalized, to be negatively impacted by these rulings, right? And by these decisions that congressmen are making, that lawmakers are making, that people in power are making, because no one's stepping up to them, right? And it's definitely not going to be the courts now that we've seen that, right? And that's kind of the most dangerous thing of all. So yes, like just because a law was written in the 60s does not mean that those people are now safe from all harm. If anything, it means that they need more protection now more than ever. And I guess that's like my final thought on that. It's terrifying to think what more damage this can be. It's terrifying to think what more damage can be done to people and to representation across the nation because of decisions like this.
Scary times. And the Supreme Court stuff should make everybody afraid. And again, if there's any reason why I maintain a significant level of anger towards the people who equivocated between Trump and Hillary Clinton in 2016, well, this is the answer, right? Like, this is what we're dealing with between, abortion rights and voting rights and what we're looking at going forward, citizenship, like all sorts of nonsense, right, that we're facing now because of the decision that a handful of people made in 2016 to say, oh, well, they're both bad. One would be just as bad as the other, and they were wrong. That apathy has damned us to a lifetime, literally a lifetime, of bad Supreme Court decisions that are going to be haunting us forever. And so I'm pissed about that. I was saying this to my wife the other day. I am more pissed about 2016 than I am 2024. And I know that a lot of people don't get that, right? Like, a lot of people don't understand, we already knew him. We had seen what he did. January 6th had happened. All of that is fair. And I was pissed about 2024. But the Democrats really fudged that and they fucked up. And I, it really was such a terrible thing. But 2016, coming off of Obama, like, to fuck around, and Hillary Clinton, like her or not, she was a wildly competent and prepared candidate for public office, and to have it's less the people who voted for Trump and more the people who just decided not to vote. They have just damned us. Those people and that apathy has damned us. And the world would be a significantly different place had 80,000 people in the states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin voted the other way, or if, the hundreds of thousands of people in those states who had previously voted for Barack Obama decided to actually show up to vote again. I'm pissed. I'm pissed at that. The general people that created the narrative that they could be the same, because these are the repercussions. Elections have consequences, and we are dealing with those consequences now. And these consequences have nothing to do with Trump getting elected the second time. Right? Like, this Supreme Court was there before Trump came back into office, right? The Supreme Court's about to get worse. It's about to get even worse when these people retire and he puts more Looney Tunes on the bench that are younger and will live for the next 50 years. It's about to get worse. But the real battle and the war for the future of the country was lost in 2016, and there were so many of us who were screaming that then, who were shouted down, who were ignored, who were told that Trump had no chance of winning. We were, people looked the other way, they didn't pay attention, there was general apathy, and we're still suffering. So I'm angry about that. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive. And the funny thing is, it's not even particular people I'm mad at. I'm just mad at a certain segment of the population that I know did that. And some of them very well may be listening, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I'm mad at you for that. I may not know that you're one of those people. It doesn't mean I'm not going to be civil to you, but in my heart, I'm mad and I'm disappointed. And I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to let that go, because the disenfranchisement of millions of people goes back to that one election. And that's how history is going to look at this. So, on a lighter note, though, to finish, a lighter note, well, kind of a lighter note, but Trump's popularity is now down to George Bush 2007 levels, 2008 levels, which is significant. If you can't remember that far back, George Bush, in the height of the Iraq War and the lead up to the economic disaster, I mean, George Bush was down to like 29% approval rating. And that's kind of where Trump is. I mean, his approval rating has sank from his all-time high of roughly 50% as president when he came into office. And he's down into the low 30s consistently now. And so what has changed? Pocketbooks. I say pocketbooks, wallets, right? Like, gas prices have hit. The war in Iran is overwhelmingly unpopular. It's as unpopular as the war in Iraq was, which is wild. It's as unpopular as the war in Vietnam was. Let's be clear, I don't think that those things are all fair comparisons. Like, we're, 60 days into this war in Iran, but it is unbelievably unpopular, and they can't seem to figure out how to end it, right? The Hormuz thing, the Strait of Hormuz, has really caused problems. This might be bad for me to say, but I'm willing to pay more money in gas for Trump's popularity to go down. I am. I hate it. I get so mad at the gas pump, but I also kind of keep hoping it goes up. Because people need, we said this before, people need to understand the ramifications and the consequences of what they have done. The country will not understand unless it hits them financially, and they're starting to understand, right? So,
well, that's one thing that you and Trump both have in common, because Trump also hopes it goes up. As he said in multiple interviews now, he goes, maybe it'll go up, and you know what, that'll be okay.
I mean, he's an idiot, right? Like, he's senile. I don't know what's going on with him. He's not well in the head, right? Like we all talked about Biden being not well in the head, and Biden was not well in the head. But Trump is saying some crazy shit now. Doesn't give me confidence knowing he's the president of the United States. No. But I saw recently, the first time I've ever seen this, you remember, Tyler, in California, I'm sure you saw the Biden stickers at the gas pump where he's like pointing up at the gas price and it says, I did this. I saw it I saw it with Trump here in New Hampshire.
Oh, I've seen them. They're everywhere in LA. Yeah.
I mean,
the Trump I did this, yeah.
Yeah. I saw the first one recently here in New Hampshire. Now, granted, admittedly, like, New Hampshire is not Los Angeles. We're a purple place. So, but I did find it to be interesting. You know, like the reaction to this, people recognizing that Donald Trump is hurting them financially. This is the first time that that's ever happened in 2 terms of him being president. And I don't think his popularity can fall much more than what it is. Like, again, 30% of the population is just going to be with him one way or the other. But the quagmire for Republicans is that he's still immensely popular with the Republican Party, to the point where these Indiana state senators that bucked him a couple months ago when they refused to budge and vote to redistrict and gerrymander their districts, he ran all this campaign against them. And it looks like 6 of the 9 of them that voted against him, or that led this, are going to lose. Which tells you that Trump still has an iron-like grip on the Republican Party, which means that whoever is running for president to succeed him is going to have to dance around him. They're not going to be able to actively criticize Trump because he's so popular within the Republican Party, but standing with Trump is going to be so universally unpopular in a general election that they're going to have to backtrack that. The Republican Party's in a shit show. We've talked about this before, but it's just getting worse. It is just getting worse for them, and I'm loving it. They deserve it. They deserve every bit of it and worse right now. They have fomented hatred and distrust among the population for the better part of 2 decades now, and it is gonna come back and bite them if we can get to having fair elections in some way, shape, or form in 2026 and 2028. So that's the bright side. It sucks that he still has this grip over the Republican Party, but it's also the worst nightmare for those of them that want to try to fill his shoes going forward. So I'd much rather be a Democrat right now than a Republican. I'll put it that way. I mean, I'd much rather be a Democrat than a Republican every day of my life. But if I'm looking politically at viability politically, I'd much rather be a Democrat. So that's the good news that we get to finish on.
Yeah, that's certainly not bad news. But thank you for that, Jesse. It's very insightful, and I hope that that a few folks, at least who are listening, have learned something new today, or have something that they can take home with them and take to their friends and their family for further discussion. And if we change some minds, then that's great. But as always, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Reunited States from Los Angeles, California. My name is Tyler Ehrig.
And from Manchester, New Hampshire, I'm Jesse Saywell.
And be sure to follow us on Instagram at Reunited States Pod. And as always, have a great night.
When the whole world has got you down, and there's no one else around, turn that frown right